Sometimes the loudest response is silence. They wanted your reaction. Don't give them the satisfaction. Don't waste words on people who deserve your silence. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can say is nothing at all. There is a unique strength in silence. Not the kind that comes from shyness or fear, but the kind born of deep self-awareness, of discipline, of choosing your peace over a petty argument. When someone tries to provoke you, to pull you into their storm, their ego is hungry, it feeds on your reaction. But what happens when you don't give them one? What happens when you choose silence instead? They feel powerless. When someone lashes out at you, whether through harsh words, passive aggression, or open disrespect, what they're often seeking is not resolution. They want reaction. Their ego craves validation, not through admiration, but through conflict. It wants to feel bigger by making you feel smaller. It's in those moments when everything in you wants to retaliate, when your pride is screaming for defense, that silence becomes your greatest strength. Because silence is not the absence of thought, it is the presence of control. Imagine someone throwing a spark into a pile of dry wood. If you fuel that fire with your reaction, it will blaze. But if you offer no fuel, no wind, no reply, it dies. No drama, no damage, just quiet. That's what silence does. It stops the fire before it ever begins. We often mistake silence for surrender, but choosing not to react isn't giving in, it's rising above. It says, I see your need for attention, but I don't need to give you mine. That kind of restraint confuses those who are used to sparring. It denies them the satisfaction of your emotional energy. It denies them control. In fact, silence flips the power dynamic. The one who speaks first, yells loudest, insists on being heard. They appear bold, but often they are the ones trying hardest to prove something. The one who stays still, who doesn't respond to every provocation, who isn't easily baited, that person is in command, not of others, but of themselves. And that is the kind of strength that can't be faked. This doesn't mean you suppress your truth, or silence your voice where it matters. It means you recognize when someone's intent isn't understanding, it's dominance, it's ego. And ego doesn't deserve an audience. Every time you choose silence over reaction, you're choosing your peace over their performance. You're saying, I will not be a player in your drama. I will not be a mirror for your insecurities. That silence can say more than 1,000 clever comebacks ever could. And here's the thing, people remember silence. They remember when they expected you to explode, but you didn't. They remember that uncomfortable stillness after their outburst. That pause, that's power. Not noisy, chaotic power. Quiet, steady, grounded power. The kind that speaks through presence, not performance. So the next time someone tries to provoke you, ask yourself, do they deserve my voice, or should I let my silence answer for me? Because when ego shouts, silence echoes louder. Ego feeds on attention. Withdrawal of that attention deflates its power. Ego, by its very nature, craves recognition. It thrives when it is seen, acknowledged, and most importantly, responded to. The more attention we give it, whether through praise or protest, the stronger it becomes. It doesn't care whether that attention is positive or negative. It only wants to be the center of focus. Think about the last time someone made a show of superiority, mocked you, or tried to draw you into an argument. In most cases, they weren't seeking truth or resolution, they were feeding their ego. They wanted to feel in control, to win a moment, to get a reaction that would affirm their sense of power. And every time we react, especially with emotion or defensiveness, We are unknowingly playing into that desire. We give our energy away, and in doing so we inflate theirs. But when we choose not to react, when we withdraw our attention completely, something different happens. Suddenly, the ego has nothing to grip onto. It's like trying to argue with the wind. The person expecting your frustration, your anger, your loud response, finds only silence, no fuel, no pushback, no confirmation of their importance. The show they prepared for doesn't go on, because the audience, your attention, is gone. And in that absence, the ego begins to collapse. Without an observer, its performance loses meaning. This is not just a passive withdrawal, it's an active decision to protect your energy. Ego wants you to be reactive, because reactions are predictable. When you're angry, you're easier to control. When you're flustered, you're easier to manipulate. But when you remain calm, when you give no visible sign that their provocation has reached you, you hold the power. The power of self-possession, the power of not giving them what they want. We often underestimate just how much strength it takes to ignore someone's ego when it's demanding our attention. It feels unnatural, especially in a world that teaches us to always have the last word, to defend ourselves at every turn, to match fire with fire. But ego is like a spoiled child. It grows louder the more you give in to its tantrums. And like that child, sometimes the most effective way to respond is not to respond at all. Let it wear itself out. Let it realize that the noise it's making doesn't get the desired effect. Only then does it begin to settle. Consider how many arguments you've witnessed, or been part of, that escalated simply because both sides kept feeding each other's egos. Someone had to win, someone had to be right. And what's left afterward? Hurt, resentment, maybe even regret. But now imagine if one of the parties had simply refused to feed the cycle, had stayed quiet, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. The argument would have faded much faster. Because without attention, ego has no stage. Books like Meditations by Marcus Aurelius remind us that we cannot control others, only our own reactions. And one of the most powerful ways to protect our peace is to stop giving power to those who provoke us. When someone is acting from a place of ego, they are not seeking connection, they are seeking dominance. They want to be seen as superior, more intelligent, more powerful. They often disguise it as humor or assertiveness, but beneath it is a need to feel bigger, and that only works if you allow yourself to feel smaller. The truth is, your attention is a gift. Not everyone deserves it. Not every comment requires your reply. Not every jab deserves a counterpunch. Sometimes the best message you can send is none at all. Silence, stillness, and presence, those are your tools. They are subtle, but they are sharp. When someone's ego is looking to be inflated, and you offer them nothing but indifference, the message is loud and clear: you are not in control of me. This practice doesn't make you cold, it makes you intentional. It doesn't mean you suppress your emotions or tolerate disrespect. It means you respond in ways that don't cost you your dignity. You step away from the trap of needing to be understood by someone who isn't even listening. You free yourself from the game they want you to play. And the beauty is, once the ego realizes it's not getting what it wants, it begins to shrink, not overnight, not without resistance, but slowly, steadily. It loses its grip. Because what is ego without attention? What is a performance with no audience? Just noise echoing into nothing. So protect your attention like it's your power, because it is. Let your silence be the boundary, let your indifference be the response, and watch how ego, starved of the spotlight, eventually fades into the background. Choosing silence is not weakness, but a conscious, courageous act of self-control. There is a deep misconception in society that silence means submission, that when you don't speak up, you've somehow lost. We are taught to equate loudness with strength, to believe that the one who argues back, who speaks the most, or who wins the verbal exchange is the powerful one. But real strength is rarely loud. Real power is rarely flashy. It is quiet, composed and controlled. Choosing silence in the face of provocation is not the absence of courage, it is the very definition of it. It means you have the ability to respond, but the wisdom to decide not to. That kind of restraint doesn't come from fear, it comes from discipline. When someone insults you, mocks you, or tries to bait you into reacting, the easier choice is to fire back. It's easy to be angry, it's easy to match their energy, to defend your pride, to say something you might later regret. That doesn't require strength, it requires impulse. But to pause, to take a breath, to understand the situation for what it is, and decide that your peace is more valuable than a temporary sense of victory, that requires a level of inner control many never develop. Silence in that moment becomes an act of protection, not of the other person, but of yourself, of your values, of your emotional energy. It takes great self-awareness to know when speaking will serve a purpose, and when it will only create noise. Silence, when chosen wisely, is a signal of mastery over the ego. Because the ego wants to be right. It wants to defend. It wants to have the last word, to prove a point. But silence says, I don't need to prove anything to you. It says, I know who I am, and I don't need your approval, your reaction, or your validation. That kind of silence is not passive, it is deliberate. It is a boundary, it communicates without shouting, it creates space where ego would normally fill the air. Think of the calmest people you've met, the ones who, even when insulted, don't flinch, who don't rush to defend themselves, who seem to be in control not just of their words, but of the entire room. That calmness comes from a refusal to be pulled into emotional chaos. It's not that they don't feel, it's that they don't let those feelings control them. That's what silence represents, a deep internal steadiness. The courage to stay rooted when someone is trying to shake you. This is not about avoiding confrontation when it's necessary. There are times when silence is complicity, when a voice must be raised in the face of injustice. But that is not the silence we're talking about here. We're talking about the kind of silence that is chosen in response to ego, provocation, and emotional manipulation. The silence that chooses to disengage from pointless conflict. The silence that honors your peace over your pride. That is the silence that requires courage. We often hear the phrase, bite your tongue, as if holding back words is a kind of suppression, but in truth it's a redirection of energy. When you choose not to retaliate, you're not bottling it up, you're transforming that energy into something stronger, into clarity, into patience, into wisdom. You're choosing the long-term strength of emotional stability over the short-term satisfaction of reaction. In The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the key lessons is to not take anything personally. When people lash out, it's more about them than it is about you. Your silence in such moments is a recognition of that truth. It says, I don't need to dance with your ego today. I choose peace. And sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can say. By saying nothing at all, this silence also sends a message, not just to others, but to yourself. It tells you that you are not controlled by external chaos, that your emotions are not available to be manipulated at will, that your self-worth is not measured by how quickly you can clap back. It reminds you that maturity means choosing what deserves your response, and what doesn't. And more often than not, the most ego-driven provocations don't deserve a second of your energy. People may mistake your silence for weakness, especially if they're used to controlling others through conflict. But in time, they will come to understand, or be unsettled by the power of your quiet. Because nothing unsettles an ego more than someone who refuses to engage with it. Someone who doesn't defend, doesn't attack, doesn't explain, just quietly holds their ground. That's silence. That's strength. That's courage. That's self-control. And once you learn the power of that silence, you don't need to raise your voice to be heard. You don't need to prove your point to be right. You don't need to win the argument to win your peace. You just need to know when to say nothing, and let that say everything.